I don't agree. The man who brought this case to Strasbourg, John Hurst, was sent to prison for bludgeoning an old lady to death. The European Court of Human Rights decided his human rights had been violated by not having the right to vote. I think he violated every imaginable right of the woman who he bludgeoned to death, and he still isn't sorry for. I think that this case points to the terrible thing that is happening in Strasbourg, which is that activist judges and ambulance-chasing lawyers are creating a situation where the ordinary human rights of ordinary people are routinely being trumped by the unordinary rights of people who have behaved appallingly in society. And I have to say there is one other reason why I think this is an important thing, which is that when David Cameron was asked about this at Prime Minister's Questions, he said that the idea that Strasbourg could force prisoner votes on this country made him feel physically sick. There is a serious democratic problem when something which has no support in the House of Commons, very little support, I think, in the country, and something which makes the Prime Minister sick is nevertheless forced on this country. So I think there's a second reason why this is a good thing, which is it has shown that our Parliament remains sovereign and can override and ignore decisions from Strasbourg. That is a very important precedent.
And only an hour.
Yes, I think he was right. And I think we should start this by just reminding ourselves what multiculturalism is not. Multiculturalism is not multiracialism. It isn't pluralism. For years, the multicultural policy has been able to glide along, in part because of that misunderstanding. Because of the misunderstanding that when you talk about multiculturalism as a policy, what you're talking about is solely immigration, or multiracialism, or so on. It's allowed itself an incredible easy ride, not least by the fact that this confusion has meant that any critic of multiculturalism has been immediately decried for years now as a racist.
What do you understand by multiculturalism?
Multiculturalism as a policy,
Cameron described.
As a policy, multiculturalism is the following. It is the idea that there is effectively no such thing as British society or British culture. There are simply different communities which you're born into. If, for instance, you're born into a community from an Asian background, you will be treated by government throughout your life as a member of the Asian community. If you're born into some other racial or religious grouping, you'll be regarded in that way. And that anything in that group could be different from what the norm in society goes on. Let me give one quick example I gave in an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. It's been quite commonly known in recent years, for instance, that girls of Pakistani origin have, at the age of 16, been taken out of British schools and married to older men. Now, if a white girl of 16 over recent decades had been married against her will to some randy old pervert who wanted to have his way with her, the state would have stepped in. It would have rightly said that that was an outrage. But, lo and behold, 16-year-old girls of Asian origin disappearing from their schools, nobody wanted to mention it because it could be thought to be racist.
Right.
The idea was that there are different values for different people in society, and there is nothing more divisive than that, and I'm glad that David Cameron has called time on it.
In answer to the question, I think he's wrong. I don't agree with Douglas's definition at all. I believe I'm a product of multiculturalism, not just multiracialism. My father came to this country in 1966. He used to write lots of letters to newspapers with his views on the stories of the day, and he used to get dog litter through his letterbox in response. That 45 years later, in my view, 45 years later, his son can sit here on Question Time with David Dimbleby and a Conservative minister and say that I'm a proud Briton, and a proud Asian, and a proud Muslim, I think is a testimony to the success of multiculturalism in this country, which is definitely not far from reason. And just on Douglas's point about anyone who goes against multiculturalism is regarded as a racist. A, that's not true, but B, let's look at the reaction to David Cameron's speech. Nick Griffin said it was a provocative speech. When Nick Griffin says your speech is provocative, you know you're in trouble. The daughter of the leader of the French National Front, Jean-Marie Le Pen, said she wanted to congratulate David Cameron on his speech. And the leader of the EDL in Luton said, he's saying what we're saying, he knows what his base is saying. So when I hear reactions like that, I do worry about such speech.
But what do you think he was getting at? What was he trying to say? Do you think he was speaking in a way that he intended to appeal?
I think he did, and it's sad because, look, I'm quite critical of David Cameron, but in 2007 he wrote an article in The Observer in which he said we can't bully people into Britishness, we have to inspire them, integration is a two-way street, it's not just about immigrant communities, it's about all of us, and that David Cameron disappeared. 4 years later he turns up in Munich, of all places, to tell us that we need this muscular liberalism and to talk like Douglas about forced marriages. Sorry, how many people have forced marriages in this country? And show me which cultural group defends forced marriages and which government defends forced marriages. I've yet to come across a single one.
I'll come back on what Mehdi Hasan said.
Well, look, I mean, both of the sort of left-wing people on the panel tonight, Mehdi and Jackie Smith, if you can still call Labour members left-wing, but both of them have done the same thing the left always does on this. You try to have a discussion about the failure of multiculturalism, and you have the BNP thrown in by Mehdi. Told, well, the BNP member congratulated him, at least concede, Mehdi, all sorts of crazy and horrible and disgusting people can jump on a bandwagon without meaning that it's the wrong thing to have said. Maybe they're just opportunists. I suspect they are. And Jackie then throws in the example of the EDL and thinks, do you really think, Jackie, that was what David Cameron was aiming to do? I mean, a couple of, 100 people marching in Luton does not mean the Prime Minister of Britain should not be making a speech about a very serious matter. And this is the problem. The debate by the left is always attempted to be shut down by associating it with far-right extremist and racist groups instead of having a frank and honest discussion.
I did not say that.
Belittle the idea of a couple of hundred extremists, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim in Luton or in other cities where the EDL have marched who live in fear of those groups, then I think they have a right for their Prime Minister not to go abroad to Germany and send them lectures from there on who isn't and isn't an extremist.
Take a couple of points.
I mean, very briefly, we didn't get into this, but one of my other objections to David Cameron's speech is the idea, you want to give a speech on multiculturalism, give a speech on multiculturalism. You want to give a speech on counter-terrorism, give a speech on counter-terrorism. Don't pretend they're one and the same thing. Don't offend our intelligence. Terrorism is not a cultural problem, terrorism is a political problem.
No, and it's a religious problem as well, and it's a religious problem
in your
as well.
view, Douglas.
No, in the view of a lot of people, including the people who carry out acts of terror, who say they do it in the name of religion.
They also say they do it because of foreign policy, and you always ignore that bit, don't you, Douglas?
No, I don't.
When they say they do it because of Iraq, you don't notice that bit.
At least listen to the reason they say they do it.
Agreed, so why didn't he talk about foreign policy in his speech on Saturday?
I'm willing to talk about foreign policy, as would David Cameron be. But you cannot keep on pretending that there is no religious component to the terrorism, because there is.
I thought you said it was cultural.
No,
Cultural religion.
Stick with religion. You're saying there is no religious component.
I'm saying there is a religious component. I'm saying it's not a cultural component. The people who blew themselves up on the London Underground were not people who couldn't speak English or didn't go to secular schools.
That's the tragedy of it.
Well, then don't say it's a cultural problem.
No, but you're
don't pretend that forced marriage.
Because maybe you're doing what
they weren't on a forced marriage.
Don't speak at once. Nobody can hear. So let's have a little bit of order, shall we? Let's have a
thing is that to get back to the question, I mean, the issue of democracy across the region. Some of us have been arguing for many years that Arab states, Muslim majority countries, have the same desire for democracy as the rest of the world. You used to hear people say about the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Europeans can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. You used to hear it said about South America, the same thing. South Americans somehow can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. And the same thing is becoming clear across the Arab and Muslim world. The Lebanese Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, said that the sight in 2005 of Iraqis going to the polls for the first time would have in time a seismic effect in the region, because people would not see their neighbours going to vote and not want that themselves. Now this is coming sometime after most of us expected it, but there are obviously problems, and it's naive to walk into this and ignore some of the problems within Egypt.
Do you see Mubarak, as Mehdi Hasan said, as our person, the West's person in Egypt?
No.
Or do you think we should have...
I think it's equally patronising to the people of Egypt to assume they have had no role in their own country. However, the West has had a very complex and, I think, unfortunate, regrettable situation in recent years of thinking that stability and the pursuit of stability in the region was the most important thing. That has come back to bite us again and again, not least in the rise in anti-Western feeling across the region. There is a problem, though, and it has to be flagged up, to go back to the question, which is the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, if it didn't have Muslim in the name, would be being described at the moment as a fascist political party. It has its roots in fascism. It is an extremist organisation. Its offshoot, the Hamas in the Gaza, when it got into power, immediately killed its opposition, and it hasn't had another election. It was just another one announced, July the 9th this year. There was meant to be another election in the Palestinian areas. The Hamas have said no. They are a one-vote, once political party, and we can't be so naive to think we can't... No. They cannot be so naive as to think that the Brotherhood, if they came to power in Egypt, would be anything other than a disaster for the region.
Well,
the state
do we have the right to intervene to prevent it?
No. Let me clarify this. So the following. It is very unwise for leaders like William Hague, David Cameron and Barack Obama to be saying who they would like to run Egypt. It's a choice for the Egyptian people, and they should remain silent. But that does not mean that behind the scenes and elsewhere you cannot say that the government, whatever it is that comes in Egypt, has to abide by, among other things, international norms, peace treaties, including the Treaty of Peace that has kept peace between Egypt and Israel for 3 decades now. And this is a very, very important thing, because if the Brotherhood comes in and says, as their leaders have said in recent days, that they will immediately block the Suez Canal and start a war with Israel, then we are collectively going to be, and the Middle East is going to be in serious trouble.
How can you,
following way,
between
you
Egypt and Israel,
when
you say you don't want intervention?
In the following way, by saying that by using soft power, by encouraging the country to go in a certain way, by making it clear that for Egypt to become a normalised country, it has to have a normal government.
None up there
and
in,
not
in the check shirt, the blue check.
Well, that was certainly a lively debate between Douglas Murray and Mehdi Hasan. And we just wanted to go ahead and let that thing, play through. But I just want to make a few comments when they, in the initial talk about multiculturalism. This was something, okay, that Britain tried, as Douglas Murray basically pointed out, that no matter where you come from, we're going to look at you as individual entities, as individual groups, not as part of the collective. And, Labour, the conservative side, I mean, they all tried this experiment, and it didn't work. Said, we don't want to force British values on you. Well, listen, you come into my house, you're going to follow my rules. If you don't like my rules, you can leave. All right? Now, obviously, I mean, I'm just playing that up, but in a certain way, there are certain rules of society that must be adhered to. And in Western democracy, it is part of that. The rule of law, habeas corpus, I mean, the Constitution, everything that, whatever is there for the good of the nation. Now, we all talk about everybody wanting to be an individual. I mean, that's what it's about in America. Everyone's an individual. You have individual rights. Well, that is true. But at the same time, there are rights that are made for society. Now, if a group comes in and it's an ethnic group or a religious group or some other group, whatever you want to call it, how do you become part of the society if you don't integrate and assimilate? That was the situation. And when Douglas pointed out the fact of the 16-year-old girls that are disappearing from high school because they're being forced back to go to Pakistan to get married against their will, I might add. These are British citizens. You don't hear about that happening in the United States of America. Why the hell is it happening in Britain? Because of multiculturalism. The British government doesn't want to get involved. Oh, they're just some brown girls. Nobody's going to care. If they were white, there would be an unbelievable amount of publicity put onto this. Could you imagine if there were a bunch of white girls that were disappearing from high school and going back to Poland or going back to Sweden or Denmark or Finland or another white European nation or a predominantly white nation? Could you imagine what would happen? Douglas points this out, and Mehdi Hasan basically, what does he do? He says, oh, that no government stands for it, and there's no society that stands for it. No, there are some people, not the entire amount of the Pakistani society inside there, or the Muslim society over there, not the entire, but there are a good number, there are a huge number that are doing that. So much so that, guess what? The Foreign Office had to set up a department within the government to go get those girls back. I mean, this multiculturalism, you know, did not work. And then everything else in terms of, they're saying Britain meddling in the affairs of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's true. If Muslim Brotherhood didn't have the word Muslim inside it, you know what? All kinds of things there. But as soon as it's Muslim, you can't say anything about it. You can't do anything about it. Oh, let them flourish. Let them do. Well, if that's what and listen, if people through their whatever reasons they are, if they elect something, elections have consequences. They all do. But in the background, that doesn't mean that states and nations can try to back channel or whatever, see if they can bring about a change, but you're not going to bring about a change with these types of Islamist terrorist groups that take over these countries, folks. It's just not going to happen. And as Mehdi Hasan said, he says he's a product of multiculturalism. No, he's not. He's integrated into the society. He's assimilated into society. He's still, obviously, he's a Muslim. But I don't think he shouldn't be considering himself an immigrant. He came from an immigrant family. His father came over. It's like my parents came over. We're, third generation. That's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't say that I'm a product of multiculturalism. I'm as American as the next person inside there or whatever. But do we have a different, do we still hold on to some of our cultural things, our religious things? Of course we do. But, there's a meld. It's sort of like, what do they call the melting pot here in the United States of America? That has really not occurred for the majority of immigrants, illegal, legal, asylees, migrants, whatever you want, entire groups. That has not occurred because when they come, they go and coalesce in those cities, in those towns, in those areas where more and more of people just like who they are, where they came from, have settled. You don't see them settling out in the countryside, No, they go straight into the cities and form what they call these ghetto areas, and that's exactly what's happening. Anyways, folks, we hope you enjoyed the video. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasser. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our video links above and below. And I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.